Sandy, thank you so much for taking time to connect with us today. It is so great to have you here.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Okay, so you recently, in the last year, have moved back from France to the United States. So I'm just curious, what do you miss about living in France? And what are the things that you don't miss?
Sure, very great question. So, I would say some of the things that I miss would be the French healthcare system was phenomenal. I had a really good experience with it. Um, Transportation system. So I lived in Nice, France, and I could hop on a train, and in 20 minutes I could be in Italy. So it's really efficient. When they're not striking. And I do really miss the scent of freshly baked croissants and baguettes when I'm walking out of the apartment. I miss that big time. But
Oh, my goodness,
um,
that sounds amazing.
yeah, but one of the things I don't really miss about France is the bureaucracy. And everybody laughs about it, but it's true. It can take forever to get things done.
Mm. Now,
Yeah.
prior to moving to France, you spoke French fluently. Is that true?
Yes. So the reason I speak French, because people are like, why did you study French and not Spanish? Is my childhood friend growing up was French American, and I wanted to be able to talk to her mom, who was from France. So that's why I learned it. Yeah. And I ended up actually completing my undergraduate work at l'Université de Montréal or University of Montreal, um, all in French, except for I did do a minor in East Asian studies and also studied Japanese.
Amazing. I took 2 years of German in high school, and that has been worthless. So I really wish I would have taken Spanish. Like everybody
I
else.
tried German. It is so hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so now, before we dive into your own story of awakening and consciousness and spirituality and so forth, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious. You now live in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and do you utilize French there, or do you miss speaking it daily? I mean, that seems like that would be a major adjustment.
Yeah, it is a major adjustment. I am fortunate in that I do work for a Big Ten university. So I work for Penn State University in international faculty advising. And sometimes with working with either international faculty or I might come across an international student, I will actually get to use my French because French is used in so many different countries. So it's really kind of fun when I get to use it.
Yeah, yeah, that's so wonderful. Well, talk to us about your own story of awakening, spirituality, consciousness, however you would define that. I'm just
Sure.
curious about that path in your life. Did you grow up with some sort of spirituality, or was that something that unfolded later? Talk to us about that.
Well, that's kind of funny as far as growing up because growing up, I guess I like to call myself as someone who literally dropped out of church at age 4. um, but that's a whole other story. But I would say as far as getting into like more of the spiritual path and more mindfulness, later on in life, I was working at a really high pressure job at Bloomberg BNA in the Washington DC area. The energy in Washington DC is constant hustle. You're just constantly, it's like a hamster wheel. um, anyway, I was working on a high profile project and I didn't realize how that much the stress was getting to me until I'd be on the metro platform and I felt like I was having a heart attack. It was strange. I literally thought, oh my gosh, I can't just collapse here, but who's going to take care of my kids? Um, and I went to the doctor thinking, oh, he'll tell me I have some cardiac issue going on. And I was shocked. He ran all these tests and it comes back to me and he's like, you're having panic attacks. And I looked at him like, what is that? I like never even like had experienced that or I had no clue. And it was pretty much my body telling me it's time for you to slow down and like take care of yourself.
Wow.
So that was a huge awakening for me. I knew like something had to change. And I ended up discovering that using creative outlets to manage the stress was the best method for me to manage that stress. So
Wow. How many years ago was that? And how did that change the trajectory of perhaps just kind of your daily life?
yeah, so that was back in 2015 already, and what it meant really for me was tapping into, okay, am I really working in a 9 to 5 that even like is meeting my needs and my life, like what I feel is like my life purpose. So I've always had sort of this dual path of publishing has always been in my life, and also like international education and some form of intercultural communication work. And I worked with, actually, with a career coach. She's fabulous. She's like the career happiness coach. So that tells you everything. Her name is Denise Fowler. She's in DC area. And I realized like I wasn't where I needed to be. And so working through, like, she actually had me do visualizations of, what you're, where is it that like envision where you're happiest, right? And it turned out I followed a path where I switched and I, course corrected, and I went from being in the high stress publishing environment to going over into international education. And that's how actually I ended up working as an international student advisor and now in international faculty advising for the 9 to 5.
Yeah, yeah. I am curious about your story of how you have served our world
Yeah,
because I when I connect with you, I feel a strong sense of service, like, to
right.
humanity. Like, I feel that. And so you've mentioned that you were in publishing and now you're in
Yeah,
international advising. Obviously,
yeah,
you're a coach as well and a
right.
published author, and we're going to get even into the fact that you're an artist. I mean, you've got all these different kind of interwoven, which I just love because that's kind of my story as well, like, I've got all these different things. They're like, "Well, what do you do?" I'm like, "Well, how long do you
You know what?
have? Let's go into this." You know? You know?
I know, it's funny because I used to always resist, in the human design world, they call it you're a manifesting generator and you're just multi-purpose, multi-passionate, whatever. And I used to kind of resist that. And I had on the paternal side, it was, you should go do business and just make lots of money. I'm like, that's not what I want to do in life. I really want to serve and help people. One of the most rewarding jobs I did in international education actually was teaching English in Japan for 2 years. That was fabulous. Yeah. Um,
How
but
old
I
were you when
also,
how old
yep.
were you when you did that?
Here's the funny thing. So most people in the JET program will do that when they're like right out of doing their bachelor's degree. And I was one of the later in life JET program participants. So I found out literally on a Saturday that I was accepted into the JET program, this Japan exchange teaching program. And on Monday, I found out I was expecting a second child. so, so I said, this is interesting. Um, and I actually said to my doctor, because you had to get medical clearance for him, and I said, do you mind omitting the fact that I'm expecting just in case they try to rescind the contract? so, and when I arrived in Japan, I explained to my supervisor, like, hey, I'm expecting a second child. I already had one. And he was hilarious. He said, don't worry, Sandy Sensei, for teacher. Don't worry, Sandy Sensei. We had a teacher last year who was pregnant. I know how to handle the paperwork. Don't worry about it.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
That's
so it's
amazing.
really,
My
yeah.
daughter went to South Korea and taught there for a year when she
Yeah.
was 23, 22, 23. And I went over and visited her for a week, and, that was one of the most challenging experiences of her life, for sure.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
I mean, she loved
Especially,
it, but she was one of the only Anglo, individuals, in her area, and she's blonde and she's tall, and
yes.
and the teachers and students, of course, just loved her, and she did a wonderful
Yeah.
job, but quite a different cultural experience for sure.
It's a big learning, it's big opportunity for growth and just learning more about your, not only the other culture, but you learn a lot about yourself. So yeah, that's great that she did that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have been involved with publishing,
Yeah.
and then you've been involved with international education, and
Yeah.
now you're helping people in terms of unlocking their creative zen. You talk about this topic of quote unquote creative zen. What does that mean to you, and
Right.
how has creativity expressed itself in and through your life? So you talked about in 2015, right? You were on the platform and you're like, oh, I'm having a heart attack. No, I'm actually having, panic attacks. And you talked
Yeah.
about creativity. I want to hear that road of creativity. What does creative Zen mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk us through that.
So it's funny. So, it's, a lot of most of my life was kind of locked up inside of me because I was sort of, parents will do this. They mean well, but they'll say, "Oh, you're the analytical scientific one, so they're not going to encourage you to be creative per se." Um, Although, in first grade, I actually started writing because I would write little short stories. I had one when I was a kid. It was Call McTurtle, and it was literally about the fact that we would go on weekends with my mom to these auctions, and she would buy all these antiques. And as a little kid, I would like help her like carry all these things back. But then it kind of shut down, and it was no, go study the sciences and be serious. Until really, when I had the stress that was going on, I didn't realize I was having panic attacks. My ex spouse, who was an artist, looked at me and one day and said, here's a blank canvas, here's some paints, and here's a paintbrush. Just paint." And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, "What am I supposed to do with this? I can't even draw a stick figure. What am I going to do?" And he just looked at me and he said, "You don't have to think about it. Just do anything. Don't like try to even draw anything. Just do it. Just do it." Right. And so I said, "Okay, let me try." And what I did was I put on some like relaxing music, not always all relaxing. Relaxing to me can also be very energetic. An eclectic playlist. And I just started painting. And I was shocked because I can't draw a stick figure. And in my mind, I could never even draw a person. And it's almost like this like creative download just like happened on the canvas. And I would look back and say, I didn't even plan to like paint this, but it just kind of happened. And like I would just kind of have these brush strokes and then there'd be a person that appeared, for example. Yeah.
Amazing. So when
Yeah.
you talk to someone about the topic of creative zen, if they're
Yeah.
struggling with stress and you
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I want to help you unlock your creative zen," and they go, "What is creative zen?" What would you say to them?
It's really getting into that state of flow where, you're just enjoying what you're doing. So you pick something and you may not realize that you enjoy it. That's the other thing too. It might not be, "Oh, I love painting. Let me go paint." It may be, "Let me explore something different and not be afraid." So it's overcoming those blocks. There's these a lot of times subconscious blocks like, "Oh, I'm just not creative," or it might be a fear of like being judged. Like, "Well, what if I, you know, wrote a poem, for example, and nobody liked it?" It's really about tapping into not being afraid to express yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that you have expressed yourself ongoing is through painting. Talk to us
Yeah.
about how that has played out in your life, and even how you have uh, applied your paintings in a more of a fashion line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for painting, my preferred medium is really using canvas and acrylic paints. They're just a lot easier for me. Oil is beautiful, but I don't have the patience. And I've done a little bit of experimenting with watercolor, but really acrylics has been my jam. And also like multi or mixed media, like doing collages. And sometimes what I would do is I also had a phase where I was doing a lot more photography, and I would take some of my photographs and either uh, chop out little bits of it and apply that to the canvas, or even like transform it and make some digital art. And so I discovered, I was like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting. This would be cool if it was, on a dress or, um, you know, in some kind of, fashion capacity, right?" Well, I discovered it's a place in Montreal where you upload photos of your artwork. And then you go in and you pick, like, "Okay, I'd like to make a dress today, or I'd like to make pants or something." And they'll transform your art into this fabulous fashion. And I was amazed. I was like, "Wow, this is my like artwork now. It's become wearable art. It is so cool." Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So another one of the ways that creativity has flowed through your life is through your very first book that you have
Yes.
published, entitled Dragonfly Dances: Poetic Musings on Life.
Yeah.
So talk to us about what motivated you to bring this book into the world.
So, Dragonfly Dances has a very special place in my heart, and I'll explain why. back last year, my mom, who has had a battle with cancer, an ongoing battle with cancer, um, her health started rapidly declining. So I had to fly back from France and go to Asheville to take care and see what was going on, advocate for her health. And one of the last conversations that I had with my mom in person was on her hospital bed. And at the time, we thought things were going to get better. And I said to my mom, I said, Mom, I've got all these books, ideas for books inside my head, and I just haven't like put them, out there yet. And I will never forget the look on her face when she just looked at me with this little twinkle in her eyes and a little smile, and she said, "Oh, just go do it." So
Mm.
a couple weeks later, sadly, my mom passed, and I just felt this like I had made a promise to her. I felt like I needed to really honor that promise, not only to her, but to myself. And the title of it, Dragonfly Dances, people are like, well, what's with the dragonfly? So a couple months later, in the summertime, after my mom passed, my sister and I had to go down to Asheville and clear out our mom's house. And it was really stressful, as you can imagine, going through your parents' life's things and divvying it up. And I was like, okay, I need to go grab some lunch, take a break because it was really getting intense. And on my way back from picking up lunch for the family, I'm stopped at a stop line. I'm alone in the car, and I am literally thinking out loud, Mom, why is this like so difficult? Why does this have to be so hard? And I have never seen dragonflies. I'm sure they existed there, but I'd never seen in all the times I visited Asheville a dragonfly. But out of nowhere comes this beautiful dragonfly and just was buzzing around the windshield. And I instantly felt like, is this my mom telling me you're going to be okay?
Hmm.
So then we went back. I went back to the house. We had lunch. And then I would go back upstairs to continue clearing out my mom's things. The very first thing that I pulled out of her closet is a t-shirt I had never seen in my life before and it had a dragonfly on it. I said, okay, I got the message. so, so yeah, so the dragonfly to me is kind of like a nod to my mom. She's always with me. She's always sort of looking over us. So, and there's
Mhm.
actually two of the poems. There's one in English and one in French titled Dragonfly. So,
Hmm. And the
yeah.
book is broken down into sections with
Yep.
different poems: family, seasons, memories, society. I can't say the other French words, so I'm going to hold off on those because it is half in English, half in French.
Right.
So, why did you choose to go down the path of publishing poems versus something that was perhaps more, autobiographical or memoir or something about your mom? Or why
Yeah.
that choice?
So, I actually am working on a memoir from my time in France, but I wanted the first thing I published, I wanted it to be the poetry because I found that poetry really had a very healing effect for me as I was processing, especially as processing the grief from losing my mom. And so it just came naturally. It just flowed. Like I would be up in the middle of the night and sort of still upset and still raw with grief. And I would just start pouring my heart out into this poetry. And I felt better. I felt like a sense of calm come over me. So, that's sort of how I ended up deciding, okay, let me take the lead with poetry. But it's funny you mentioned memoir because I am literally in the middle of sort of integrating what all happened while I was in France. And I'm writing a slice of memoir about the time in France. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Would
Yeah.
you mind reading a couple of poems for us?
Sure.
Tell me
So
which one, because I want to turn to that page and I want to
sure.
read along with you.
Okay. And this is the book. I'm going to start with on page 32, Magic Carpet.
Okay.
Okay. Got it. So, magic carpet. Close your eyes. Magic carpet made of bath towels. Nap time. Drifting off, then brutally awakened. Stop talking, yelled the kindergarten teacher. Connected the dots so many years later. That is why she didn't speak her truth. Okay.
Ah.
So that one is based on actual experience. So when I was doing a lot of inner work, I wanted to figure out why was it I was always so hesitant to speak up in life. And I kind of retraced my steps and back to a time where I remember at nap time getting yelled at when I wasn't even talking. so
Mm.
so yeah, so that's
As a side note, thank you for sharing that. And as a side
yeah.
note, just in terms of people, I would really encourage you to get the book. We'll include the link to Amazon in the show
Yeah.
notes. But there's some beautiful type font treatments throughout the book as well that are really a fun addition. So
Yeah, I
you
had yeah.
go ahead.
No, yeah, I was really fortunate. I worked with a brilliant interior book designer while I was in France who brought that to life and read the poetry, and that's just like if that's what she was, more than just like a typesetter, she really was an artist. Simona.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Before you read another poem to us,
Yeah.
I want to hear about the story of the cover. And if
Yeah.
you're reading this on our website, of course, you'll see the cover there embedded on the
Yeah.
video. Do you mind holding up the cover?
Yeah, sure.
And then, so describe what that is and why that is. It's so beautiful. But
Yeah.
talk to us about the meaning behind it.
So the meaning behind it really is that's like
And just maybe describe it just for people who are listening just on the audio
yeah.
podcast.
So for those who don't see it, it's literally a girl, a young girl, looking ahead towards the horizon, and behind her is her shadow, and her shadow is in the shape of a dragonfly. So it's literally supposed to be representative of me. It's sort of like the younger self as well as the future self. So looking towards the future. And then that dragonfly really represents, I would say, transformation and also sort of the knowing that even when like my mom is like passed away, she's still there guiding me, still kind of come through. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, such a wonderful cover.
Yeah.
Would you
Thanks.
mind reading another poem for us?
Sure, I'll do one in French, which I don't expect you to understand, but I'll explain what it's about after.
It will sound beautiful. That's what I know.
Great. La mer, tes vagues douces qui enlèvent et lavent tous mes soucis, mes peines et mes douleurs. Tes vagues fortes qui secouent, qui me réveillent, qui brassent. Ton sable tant voulu, oui, ces galets niçois, quelle galère! Ton ciel bleu et ton soleil qui brille jour après jour. Les rayons de soleil dansent comme une ballerine sur l'eau, scintillent comme des diamants, miroitant comme des fées. Tes profondeurs changent avec tes couleurs, tes nuances bleuâtres, verdâtres, chaque jour tu évolues. La mer nous écoute, elle ne juge pas, elle reçoit. Nos méditations, espoirs, nos rêves. La mer nous redonne la force, évacuant notre chagrin, elle nous remplit de vie. So you're like, what is that about? So it's pretty much a poem that I wrote, and it's titled "The Mer," which is the sea, or it could be the ocean. For me, it could be either the Mediterranean Sea, where I spent time in France, living in Nice, or it could also be the Atlantic Ocean because I grew up pretty much at the beach in Southampton, New York. And what I'm pretty much talking about in here, it's talking about like the soft waves and how like the waves of the ocean wash away your sorrows and your worries, and then how stronger waves kind of wake you up and sort of shake things up. And then I talk about the sand because when you're walking on the beach, it's a very grounding experience. So I talk about how much I wish the sand at the beaches in Nice. I really miss the sand because they have like these rocks. so, so kind of making a nod to the beach there in Nice. And then I talk about how the blue sky and the sun like shining, because that's uplifting. So I wanted the poem to uplift people's spirits, right? And how the sun rays or the sunlight would dance across the water, almost like a ballerina on the water. And it was like diamonds shining. And then I talk about the different colors because, especially in the Mediterranean, I don't know for maybe other bodies of water, but the Mediterranean Sea is constantly shifting and changing colors. It'll go from like a bluish to a greenish, and I talk about like how it evolves, and that's not just about the actual water, but it's also about like you, your spirituality and how you can evolve and your personal growth. And then I say, like, the sea listens to us. It doesn't judge us. It receives us. It receives like our meditations and our dreams and our hopes. So it's kind of like taking that in, and it gives back to us like force, like a life force. It takes away the sorrow and fills us up with life. So it's a very spiritual poem. Yeah. And
Mhm.
it's funny because I found that the French poems that I wrote were even more spiritual. I wouldn't say necessarily more so than the English, but just in a different way. I don't know how to describe it, but um, I used a lot more references to nature, like symbolism through nature, and it just really kind of tapped into my spirituality, especially in French. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
How did this process of writing them, putting them together? I mean, I've, published multiple books, so I know the
Yeah.
process is a lot.
Yeah.
And how did that process help you in processing your mom's passing?
So for me, it was very helpful in that it gave me an opportunity to honor my mom. And there's a preface that explains even what I explained already, the why, like why this book. Um, so I'd say just from start to finish, being able to say, okay, I've done this. In my mind, it's like, okay, thinking up, hey mom, I did it. um, but yeah, it's I've always been I'm a Virgo, by the way. So for the astrologers out there, very methodical. So that part of things really wasn't the difficult part. So once I got into like, okay, this is it. I'm doing it. I'm committing to doing this. Um, it just kind of happened. It just set the wheels in motion and it happened. And again, when I look at the book and I read from it, it just still reminds me like how like short life is. And when you have these projects that you keep saying, oh, someday I'll write that book, or someday I'll you know paint that painting, or whatever it is that you do, it just reminds you like life is kind of short. Like, go do it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That ties into a couple sentences that I want to read from your website and get
Sure.
your reflection on this. You
Yep.
write, there are no rules when it comes to creative expression. There's only the way that feels life giving to you. Your creative zen shines when you let your hair down, shred up any imposter syndrome, and don't give an F about what anyone else thinks. I would love to hear, one, do you feel like you're there? Do you feel like you are living that statement? Like, are you
Yeah.
embodying that? And if you are, how did you get to that point?
Sure. Yeah. I feel like finally I'm in this season in life where I really don't give an F about what people think anymore. Um, as far as like, oh, what if I'm not good enough? Because, a lot of us, many of us have that. Oh, I'm not, is my work good enough? Am I good enough? I'm at that point where it's like it's time to just stop seeking validation from other people. And I think maybe you reach a certain point in life where you get to that, whether it's alone, whether it's through various healings. For me, it really helped. I would say the pandemic actually was very helpful for me as far as doing a lot of that inner work and inner healing. But also, like I said, like losing my mom to it was a 4-year battle with a very aggressive cancer. And it just forced me to evaluate like what really matters at the end of the day. Um, and for me, that whole like um letting that creative zen shine and come through, it's really about letting go, releasing like that anxiety, releasing that perfectionism, So I like to joke around that I'm a recovering type A person. And now, it's like, just let it go. um, and also, again, like that fear of what are people going to think and a need for control. Now, it's funny to talk about the need for control because I will confess for the book, one of the reasons I did not go with trying to get a publisher is primarily speaking to one of my former coworkers who is a published author. She had her books all published by, I won't name the publisher, and she finally decided to ask for the rights back to her books so she could republish and self-publish to retain artistic control. So I wanted to retain that artistic control, and that's why I decided to self-publish my book instead of go with, work with a traditional publishing company.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Dragonfly Dances, Poetic Musings on Life. We definitely will have that link in all the places. And so, I really encourage you to pick it up. Talk to us about your coaching. Who do
Sure.
you serve and how can you help people?
Sure. So I help high achievers embrace the magical power of poetry to unlock their creative zen and finally get unstuck. So what that looks like is it's a one-on-one intensive coaching session where we'll work on those blocks and removing those blocks, releasing those blocks to tap into your creative zen. And there'll be more details on the website. So
Your website, peoniesandprose.com, will have
yeah.
that linked everywhere, of course. How did you come up with the name Peonies and Prose?
Yeah. So peonies and prose is a good question because peonies is this flower that has a very special meaning in my family. So, um, growing up, we used to visit very favorite grandmother's aunt and uncle. Um, and in their backyard was filled, depending on the time of year, with peonies, these gorgeous peonies. They're very fragrant. And it turns out that I ended up purchasing their home when they went into assisted living. And so my backyard was filled with these gorgeous peonies. When we decided to move to Japan, we decided to sell the house. And before we actually turned over the keys, my sister, who also lived in the DC area, said, "Do you mind if I dig up some of the peony bulbs so we could keep these? Because those peonies were in our family since, I kid you not, the 1960s." So they had a very special meaning to us. And it was also this favorite aunt and uncle. They're the ones who always inspired me to like travel. Like ever since I was a kid, they would show us back in the day when they had slideshows of where they had been. So my sister dug up the peonies and, took them back to where she lives in Virginia. When I came back from Japan, my sister gifted me back some of those peonies. So it's just, there's always been this strong
Ah,
attachment to peonies. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
beautiful.
So.
For some reason, I grew up in the South calling them peonies.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why, if that's a
Oh,
Southern thing or if
it
maybe it's
might
just my
be.
family or whatever. Your
Yeah.
your articulation sounds very much more, fancy. Very much more fancy. Look at me. I'm so articulate. Um,
That's the Mid Atlantic.
um, so I want to talk just for a second about if somebody is feeling kind of locked up right now in their life or business, they're feeling dull, maybe bored, they're struggling with trying to experience creativity in whatever area of their life. What practical advice would you let them or would you provide them with to help them let go and experience that creative flow?
So what I would recommend is pick something easy. Just whether it's if you want to write or if it's you want to paint, pick something that's accessible and doesn't require learning a million skills, and just start doing it. And what I like to do for me personally is literally just like put on some music. I should share my playlist. They're crazy. All kinds of music from around the world and in different languages. Um, and you know what I do to psych myself out? I will tell you is I will say to myself, "Yeah, let me just try this for like 20 minutes, right?" And you would not be I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised, but believe it or not, the 20 minutes very quickly becomes like 2 to 3 hours because you get into that sort of creative flow and just sort of release any judgment. Like, don't judge yourself. So, Other ways too, like for some people that might not be what works for them, but for some people it might be through movement, like getting up and dancing, or going out in nature and getting grounded and connecting with nature. So it really is, it depends on the person. And that's in the coaching, we talk about what best works for each person's unique. Everybody's unique, so
Absolutely. All right. So if you're interested in connecting with Sandi about her Unlock Your Creative Zen coaching program, you can check out her website, which she would say is peoniesandprose.com. I'm going to say it's like a Southern, kid, peoniesandprose.com. Either way, it's linked
yeah.
in our show notes. And of course, you have your Instagram account, which is
Yeah, so it's peonies_pros, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So, yeah.
great. We'll link all of those wonderful places in the show notes. So, Sandi, I just appreciate how you have brought your heart, your generosity to the table today. And I love the ways that you're serving humanity and you're making a difference in our world. Thank you for this book that you've given birth to in the world. And I'm thankful that your mom nudged you to say, you can do it, get it done. So that's wonderful. So thank you for
Oh,
being with us.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really love what you're doing with the Awaken platform. I love all the interviews and all the articles. So, thank you so much for creating this space.